Pisa. A city that's famous because of one of the greatest engineering flops in history. And yes, the Leaning Tower wasn't meant to lean, but let's be honest. It turned this little Tuscan city into one of the world's most recognizable places. Today, I'm taking you through Pisa. Beyond the postcard shot. We'll walk through its medieval city gates, explore the Square of Miracles with its marble masterpieces, peek into the cathedral with its glittering gold ceiling. And we'll tackle the Leaning Tower itself. Plus, quirky history, local tips, and the kind of stories you'll want to bring up at your next dinner party. We're starting right at the city gates. Pisa is still wrapped in these massive medieval walls. 11 meters high and stretching for 3 kilometers. Welcome to the Square of Miracles. Or as Italians call it, Piazza dei Miracoli. There are 4 jaw-dropping monuments in one place, and they are the Leaning Tower, the cathedral, the baptistry, and the monumental cemetery called Campo Santo. Each one carved out of white marble, each one more dramatic than the last. We grabbed our tickets online, and we highly recommend purchasing the combined ticket, which costs less than €30. I'll leave my discount code in the description below if you want to plan ahead, and trust me, it saves you from standing in lines longer than a Monday morning Starbucks queue. First stop is the crown jewel, the Cathedral of Pisa, or Duomo di Pisa. Step inside and the black and white striped marble instantly catches your eye. It almost feels like you've walked into a zebra-themed palace, but elegant. Then you look up, and the ceiling hits you with pure gold. Not painted gold but actual gilding. Can you imagine the first peasants walking in back then? Their jaws must have hit the floor. This was the biggest, richest, and most spectacular cathedral in Europe when it was built in the 11th century. Think about that. Pisa was showing off, before Florence or Venice even thought about stealing the spotlight. There's also Giovanni Pisano's pulpit. This swirling masterpiece of marble figures that looks like it's frozen mid-story. Honestly, it's so detailed you half expect the statues to hop off and start preaching. By the way, the cathedral is free. You just need a timed entry ticket, which you automatically get if you buy any ticket for the Square of Miracles. Pro tip. That means you can enter anytime once you've got one. Zero stress. The cathedral is massive. We're talking 96 meters long and 35 meters wide, with a dome that rises nearly 35 meters into the sky. For the 11th century, that was mind-blowing. When it was finished in 1118, Pisa had built one of the largest churches in the world. An architectural flex to remind everyone who was boss in the Mediterranean trade game. The style is called Pisan Romanesque, and it is a style that is unique to this city. Rounded arches, striped marble, geometric patterns, and little details borrowed from all over the world. Spiraling figures, scenes from the life of Christ, each one carved with such expression you'd swear they were frozen mid-conversation. Some people say the cathedral houses some of the best Gothic sculptures in Italy. At the far end, the apse glows with a massive mosaic of Christ Pantocrator, which survived a devastating fire in 1595. That fire destroyed much of the interior decoration, but Pisa didn't give up. The cathedral wasn't always untouchable though. Over the centuries, it's been damaged by fire, looted during wars, and even struck by lightning. But here it stands, a survivor, telling the story of Pisa's rise, struggles, and resilience. And here's something a lot of visitors don't realize: the cathedral is also a resting place. The most famous tomb inside belongs to Emperor Henry VII of Luxembourg, a Holy Roman Emperor who died in 1313, while campaigning in Italy. The baptistry, dedicated to St. John the Baptist, is located next to the cathedral, and we will visit it later on, in this video. So stick around and make sure you subscribe, if you have not done so yet. Alright, let's step away from marble masterpieces for a moment and look at something that literally framed Pisa for centuries. The city walls. Pisa's medieval walls are impressive, 11 meters tall, stretching for about 3 kilometers, wrapping the historic center like a stone fortress. What's cool is that today, you can actually walk the walls. There's a trail that lets you see Pisa from above, with unique angles of the cathedral, the baptistry, and of course, the Leaning Tower. Trust me, it's one of the best ways to escape the crowds below. Now it's time to slow down the pace and step into one of Pisa's most hauntingly beautiful places. It is called the Campo Santo Monumentale, or Monumental Cemetery. At first glance, it looks like a massive cloister running along one side of the Square of Miracles. But here's the twist, because, in all honesty, this isn't just a cemetery. In fact, it's a sacred container of history, art, and stories stretching back centuries. Allow me to explain. First, let's start with the name. Campo Santo means holy field, and it's not just a poetic title. When the Crusaders came back from the Holy Land, they brought shiploads of sacred soil from Jerusalem, taken from Golgotha, the very hill where Jesus was crucified. That soil was spread here, turning this into one of the most revered burial grounds in Europe. Imagine being a wealthy Pisan noble back in the 13th century. Being buried here wasn't just about prestige, it was practically a VIP fast track to heaven. The construction began in 1277, designed by Giovanni di Simone, and it took centuries to complete. What you see today is a vast rectangular cloister with Gothic arcades lining the walls. Walk inside and you're greeted by rows of delicate pointed arches and tracery that almost look like lace carved out of marble. But here's where it gets fascinating. The walls of Campo Santo were once covered in frescoes, hundreds of meters of them, painted over centuries. The most famous series was called The Triumph of Death. Painted in the 14th century, it's a chilling, almost cinematic mural of skeletons, angels, and noblemen being reminded that, no matter your wealth, death comes for all. A little heavy for a tourist stroll, but it gives you goosebumps when you think about medieval pilgrims standing here, staring at those images, realizing the fleeting nature of life. The courtyard in the middle is serene. A lush patch of grass ringed by silent stone, the kind of place where the chaos of the Leaning Tower selfie crowds feels a million miles away. Unfortunately, tragedy struck in World War II. In 1944, an Allied bombing raid hit the roof, and the fire destroyed most of those frescoes. The heat even caused the lead roof to melt, dripping down the walls and damaging centuries of art. Heartbreaking. But in true Pisan resilience, painstaking restorations began, and today, many frescoes have been saved or reconstructed. So when you walk through, you're not just looking at art, you're looking at survival. Campo Santo is roughly 110 meters long and 45 meters wide, with a perimeter of about 310 meters. The central courtyard that you saw a while back is lush and green, giving the cloisters plenty of breathing room and making every sarcophagus and fresco feel like it has its own stage. This place is massive, so if you ever visit, take your time wandering, and you'll feel the weight of centuries under your feet. Construction began in 1277, commissioned by Archbishop Federico Visconti, and took nearly 200 years to complete, finishing around 1464. While we're wandering through Campo Santo, it's a great time to take a step back and talk about the town itself, because all these incredible buildings didn't appear out of nowhere. Pisa is a medium-sized city by modern Italian standards, with around 90,000 residents today. But back in the Middle Ages, it was a powerhouse. The city sits on the Arno River, not too far from the coast, and this was a game-changer. It was one of the richest cities in Europe, trading everything from grain and olive oil to spices and silk. By the 11th and 12th centuries, Pisa was a key player in the Mediterranean, controlling ports, fleets, and even colonies in Sardinia, Corsica, and North Africa. Because of this wealth, Pisa could afford to build extravagant monuments. The cathedral, the baptistry, the Campo Santo, and of course, the tower. These weren't just religious buildings. They were status symbols, showing off the city's power, faith, and cosmopolitan connections. Campo Santo also houses countless tombs. The most famous is the tomb of Archbishop Ranierius, Pisa's patron saint. There are also Roman sarcophagi, reused for nobles, scholars, and merchants, and each stone telling multiple layered stories, blending classical myth and Christian faith. If you walk around, you can see the tools used for the restoration projects, and in one corner of the building, you will come across this remarkable fresco cycle, known as Scenes from the Old and New Testament. In 1468, renowned Renaissance painter, Benozzo Gozzoli, embarked on an ambitious project to adorn the walls of the Campo Santo Monumentale, with a series of frescoes depicting scenes from both the Old and New Testaments. Many of these fresco pieces, or fragments of them, are now housed or displayed in museums nearby, due to preservation efforts. And later on, in this video, we will visit one of these museums, known as Sinopia Museum, where you will be able to see restored frescoes and their preparatory outlines. So make sure that you do stick around. Before this video on Pisa, I actually made a little mini-series on the Cinque Terre, where we explored all 5 villages. And yes, I've made a full video on each one of them. If you'd like to check those out, I'll leave a link to the playlist down in the description. Before leaving the Campo Santo, let's pause once more in this extraordinary cloister. The courtyard itself is not just empty grass surrounded by arches. It's almost like a spiritual garden. Imagine A vast green rectangle, 127 meters long and 55 meters wide, enclosed on all four sides by white marble arcades, their Gothic tracery casting soft shadows across the grass. At its center lies soil, which legend says was brought back by crusaders from Golgotha, the hill where Christ was crucified. Stepping outside, we are back in the buzzing Piazza dei Miracoli. The silence of the cloister gives way to chatter, cameras clicking, street vendors selling souvenirs, and sunlight bouncing off the marble. On our right, the magnificent cathedral rises. And ahead, the leaning tower peeks through the crowd, impossible to ignore. Along the way we will pass by La Torre allo Specchio, a smaller tower, often overlooked, nicknamed the Mirrored Tower. It earned this name because of how its stone facade seems to glow under sunlight like a mirror. Not nearly as famous as its leaning neighbor, but locals appreciate its symmetry and sturdiness, a little reminder that Pisa isn't only about that one iconic tilt. The Fallen Angel is a bronze sculpture by Polish artist Igor Mitorai, resting dramatically on the grass. It's a winged face, broken and immense, lying almost helplessly. Finally, the star of the show, the Leaning Tower. Officially, it's the campanella of the Cathedral of Pisa, a freestanding bell tower meant to complement the Duomo. The tower stands 57 meters tall, and was built in 3 main stages between 1173 and 1372. That's nearly 200 years, slowed down not by lack of ambition, but by one big problem: the ground. Pisa sits on soft alluvial soil near the Arno River, and almost immediately after construction began, the foundations started sinking. By the time they reached the 3rd story, it was already tilting. Over centuries, the tilt became its trademark. Since then, it has proudly stood as one of the world's most famous architectural mistakes. Next, we step into the Museo della Sinopia, often skipped by rushed visitors, but truly unmissable. This museum preserves the sinopi, the preparatory drawings for frescoes. Well, the natural question that you all want to ask me now is, what are sinopi? When medieval artists painted frescoes, they first sketched outlines directly onto the fresh plaster, like an underdrawing. When the Campo Santo was badly damaged during World War II, restorers detached fresco fragments from the walls. And when they did, underneath, they discovered the original sinopi, the preparatory sketches. Suddenly, centuries-old drawings by masters like Benozzo Gozzoli and Piero di Puccio came back to light. It was like opening a secret sketchbook hidden for 600 years. That's what makes this museum so important. Inside, you'll see entire walls filled with these red ochre sketches, dramatic outlines of the Old Testament stories that once adorned the Campo Santo. Let's talk about the building itself. Because the museum is housed in what used to be the new Hospital of the Holy Spirit, a medieval hospital built in the late 13th century to take care of the sick and pilgrims passing through Pisa. It's a long rectangular building, rather austere on the outside compared to the cathedral and tower, but inside you'll find high vaulted ceilings and wide open halls, the perfect space for displaying huge fresco drawings. One of the highlights you'll find here is the collection of sinopi from Benozzo Gozzoli. Cycle of the Old Testament, scenes like Noah's Ark, the Tower of Babel, and stories of Abraham. Then there's the work of Piero di Puccio, another major contributor to the Campo Santo frescoes. His cycle covered biblical stories from Genesis to Exodus. The sinopi show his grand vision for monumental, architectural compositions. Think giant cities, arches, and towers framing biblical figures. Now, we can't talk about this museum without mentioning Carlo Lazinio. He was the director of the Campo Santo in the 19th century and played a huge role in preserving its art. Lazinio was a printmaker and engraver, and he devoted decades to documenting the frescoes. He created hundreds of engravings, which circulated widely across Europe. Thanks to him, even before photography, scholars and artists in Paris, London, and Vienna knew what the Campo Santo looked like. His most famous engraving is known as The Last Judgment in Hell. And standing in front of it, you can almost feel the chaos of the damned being dragged into flames. Leaving the museum, hunger calls. Just behind the square lies Via Santa Maria, lined with trattorias, pizzerias, and cafes. We stop here for pizza and pasta, quintessential Italian fuel. The food was delicious, and the wine paired perfectly. As we eat, life unfolds around us. Locals chatting animatedly with their hands, tourists studying their maps, and university students grabbing a quick bite before class. This is Via Santa Maria, one of Pisa's liveliest and most historic streets. It's easy to mistake it for Via Roma, as our caption did. But trust me, it's definitely Via Santa Maria, and this little stretch has been the main artery of Pisan life for centuries. The street itself runs parallel to the city walls, gently curving toward the Arno River. Once, it was a route taken by merchants and pilgrims traveling between Pisa's port and its religious heart. Today, it's an irresistible blend of old-world charm and student energy, thanks to the University of Pisa, just a few blocks away. And here's a fun secret. If you follow the street all the way down, you'll end up at the Arno River, where Pisa's famous bridges connect both sides of the city. Via Santa Maria isn't just about food, though. Between bites, you can admire little artisan shops, selling leather goods, handmade jewelry, watercolor paintings of Pisa's landmarks. Refueled and recharged, we return to the Piazza dei Miracoli, for our final stop, the Baptistry of St. John. Piazza dei Miracoli has classic photo spots and some hidden gems. For the holding up the tower spot, go onto the grass or paved walkways in front of the tower, looking straight at it. This is where everyone does the cheesy pushing or holding pose. Crowded, but iconic. If you go right up to the tower and shoot upwards, the lean looks dramatic against the sky. Perfect for wide-angle or vertical shots. And another spot is from the baptistry balcony, where we will bring you in a short while. So this is the Baptistry of St. John, and if the Leaning Tower is the superstar, then the baptistry is its quiet genius. Because this is the largest baptistry in all of Italy, standing at an astonishing 54 meters high and 34 meters wide. The moment you step inside, it's breathtaking. The light pours through tall, narrow windows, creating shifting patterns on the stone floor. The space feels both intimate and monumental, circular, echoing, and designed to inspire awe. At the center lies the octagonal baptismal font, carved in 1246 by Guido Bigarelli da Como. For centuries, Pisan children were baptized right here, their voices echoing under the soaring dome. This baptistry is world famous for its acoustics. The sound inside carries and multiplies in a way you almost have to hear to believe. If a guide or visitor sings a single note, it resonates for several seconds, layering into chords that feel like an invisible choir. Climbing the narrow staircase takes us to the upper gallery. From here, the view is stunning. You look down onto the baptismal font from above. The marble pulpit, crafted by Nicola Pisano in 1260, is a masterpiece of Gothic sculpture. Look closely and you'll see detailed carvings of biblical stories, prophets, and even Hercules, a nod to classical antiquity woven into Christian art. From up here, you can also understand why it's said that the acoustics were designed deliberately for an invisible choir, turning even a humble baptism into a celestial experience. And from up here, more importantly, you get one of the best hidden photo spots in Pisa. A perfect vantage point of the cathedral's nave and apse through the baptistry's arched windows. It's like framing history inside history. So, what did we discover today? The Piazza dei Miracoli isn't just about the Leaning Tower, though yes, that's the star attraction. It's a constellation of masterpieces. The cathedral, the baptistry, the Campo Santo, and the Sinopia Museum, all telling the story of Pisa's rise, fall, and reinvention. If you enjoyed our visit to the Sinopia Museum today, you're going to love our Vatican Museum episode, where we dive into some of the most jaw-dropping art collections in the world. Don't miss it, and I'll leave the link in the description below.